10 years ago this week, the Reverend Dr. William Barber, founder of the Moral Monday Movement, Repairers of the Breach, and the Poor People's Campaign, preached a national sermon on race on the Sunday after Donald Trump was elected the first time. Nearly 1,000 people showed up at Myers Park Baptist Church to hear him at the interfaith service that the community leadership had planned with me. People were distraught and disappointed, desperately looking for some form of meaning and hope. And Dr. Barber was under the weather, losing his voice, grieving in his own way. And yet when he arrived, he was so moved by the energy of the congregation that he preached for an hour and a half. And during the sermon, he explicitly condemned Trump's campaign as racist and misogynist and xenophobic and unchristian. And he challenged the ongoing racial disparities in education and healthcare and housing and economics, and reminded us that we've had white supremacists in the White House before. Afterward, he brought me down in front of the congregation and anointed me with oil for the work of resistance in the age of Trump. And then he asked me to help him to anoint the rest of the congregation that night as well. Some of you I know were there. It was a night I will never forget. But a lot of people don't know or have failed to remember that the text for his sermon that night was 1 Samuel 8. Talk about prophetic. Dr. Barber said that night, just like Israel, the American people wanted a king to be like the other nations, to have a strong man who will go out before us and fight our battles. And God told Samuel to give the people what they wanted, but offered these words, "For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them." The people rejected God so that they could have a king who would fight for them. No other passage in the Bible sums up the fascist predicament we find ourselves in America today, and the idolatrous phenomenon of white Christian nationalism quite like 1 Samuel 8. It clearly and plainly reveals to us that the reason people choose a king, the motivation behind the monarchy, the desire that dictates a dictatorship is always fear. That feeling of being vulnerable, insecure, threatened in some way, causes people to turn towards a strong man who looks tough, who looks brazen, who we imagine will fight for us. It's a tale as old as time, but the problem is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it always turns out that the very king that the people thought would save and protect them would go on to enslave and oppress them. After the most recent election of Donald Trump, Roland Martin jumped on his Black Star Network and said the same thing Barber had said 8 years before. Just as in 1 Samuel 8, America wanted a king, so they elected Saul. He went on to say, remember that America got what it wanted, and America is going to get what it deserves. Martin here highlighted one of the most troubling spiritual parts of this passage. The troubling, disquieting reality that there are times in our lives and in our society when God will give us the desires of our hearts, even if they are self-destructive. God will sometimes allow us to have what we want, even if it does not ultimately benefit us or the world. And God will do that so that we might have the opportunity to learn through the natural consequences and repercussions of our actions. The Hindus and the Buddhists call it karma. It's cause and effect. Jesus said, you reap what you sow. Malcolm X said, the chickens come home to roost. But the prophet Samuel would not let the people's push for kingship go unchallenged. He warned them that a monarchy would give birth to an economy of greed geared to increase the wealth of the elite through ruthless policies of extraction and militarism. He told them the truth about the logic and impulse of empire. It requires kings to engage in the practice of taking and taking and taking and taking from the people, and then giving that wealth over to commanders and courtiers and officers and soldiers until it is creates a well-structured hierarchy established over all people, and the majority find themselves enslaved in some form or fashion. The prophet Samuel in this passage staged the first ever No Kings protest in history. In one of the most powerful prophetic statements in the Bible, Samuel told the people, the king will take your sons and appoint them to chariots and horsemen, appoint them for commanders of thousands and fifties to plow the ground and reap his harvest and make implements of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards and give it to your officers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you will become his slaves. And then you will cry out because of your king, whom you've chosen for yourself, but the Lord will not answer. Samuel's warning is one of the Bible's most strident indictments, not only of kingship, but of empire and colonialism and imperialism and militarism and policing. The king does not take randomly or arbitrarily in this passage. The king takes for the purpose of amassing wealth and amassing weapons and armies, amassing power to control and to oppress the people, power to maintain power, the right to amass more and more power. The Hebrew word here, yakak, or take, appears 6 times in this passage, and it literally means to plunder, to loot, to pillage, to rob, to raid, to ransack. It's a word that means to steal goods from a person using force in a time of war or civil disorder, the violent and dishonest acquisition of another's property. That is the fundamental nature of kings and kingship. Thievery. Thievery. It's not difficult to hear the resonances between Samuel's warning to the Israelites and President Eisenhower's warning to America more than a half century ago. During his farewell address in January of 1961, Eisenhower warned, "In the councils of government, we must guard," he said, "against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." His words were echoed by Dr. King in a speech at the Riverside Church in 1967 when he warned against the 3 great evils that plague American society: racism, materialism, and militarism. We did not heed either of these warnings. In fact, we went the opposite direction by advancing the mass proliferation of the military-industrial complex into a $997 billion industry, what William Hartung calls the $1 trillion war machine, reaching $1 trillion now for the first time in American history. We now spend more on defense than the next 9 countries combined, which is 40% of the world's total military spending. And there is always an economic element to this violence and injustice. War is profitable. And now they're making war on the American people. The Martinique philosopher Aimé Césaire once said, "Fascism is the practice of colonization turned back in on its own people." Today, the mass proliferation of weapons and manufacturing has led to the hyper-militarization of America's police forces and the American people. There are more guns than there are people in this country. And the violence and destruction that we've writ large around the world has now boomeranged back home from Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan and Gaza into American neighborhoods, into Charlotte, in mass shootings with AR-15 style assault rifles, in over-policing, in what Radley Balco calls the rise of the warrior cop that we see in ICE and Border Patrol. This week we learn that the same federal Gestapo police force that was in LA and Chicago has come to Charlotte. And we must be clear, there is no reason for them to be here. There is no reason for them to be here. There has been no rise in crime in Charlotte. One tragic stabbing on the light rail does not merit a crime spree. There is one reason and one reason only that Border Patrol has been sent to Charlotte, and that is to terrorize our immigrant neighbors, to traumatize their families, to create chaos and unrest in our community. It is state-sanctioned terrorism, plain and simple, and we have to call it the way we see it. And I know that they say that the goal of terrorism is to strike fear in the hearts of average people, but this terrorism we're experiencing has a multitude of objectives. The purpose here is not just to create fear and chaos, but to undermine cities with black populations and black political leadership in order to justify racist assumptions and to legitimize authoritarian rule all over the country. The goal is to distract us also, right? From the Epstein files, from the government shutdown, from the rise of healthcare premiums, from the wobbling stock market that's gotten out of control, from the massive transfer of wealth to the wealthy that is happening in this country. The motto of the Trump administration and King Saul, the motto that Samuel warned the people of Israel about, they could be the same motto for the Trump administration and the administration of Saul. We're going to fleece you while we police you. We're going to fleece you while we police you. In the case of the king in Samuel 8, it meant taking sons, daughters, lands, resources, livestock to build an army and a palace and a kingdom with loyal servants in high places. In the case of Trump, it means taking away government agencies, taking away necessary regulations, taking away the freedom of the press, taking away the rule of law, civil rights, the right to protest, protections for immigrants and transgender people and the environment, and SNAP benefits and the poor, taking and taking and taking while federal troops terrorize our communities across the nations. They are trying to fleece us while they police us. And you might be wondering, how could any follower of Jesus in this country possibly support what is happening? But as our gospel reading shows us, even the closest disciples of Jesus struggled with the temptation of power, the lure of lordship and status. Even James and John's mother, Mrs. Zebedee, got in on the action, trying to secure a place of status and power for her boys in the kingdom. And it really ticked the other disciples off, who were probably saying, hey, James, John, get your mom, are you mama's boys? Get your mother out of here. But Jesus told them all, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over people, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it will not be so among you. Whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant. He was saying, we're not going to be like the rulers and the nations of this world, whose political leaders are tyrants that lord power over and oppress the people. My followers must strive to have a different relationship with power. Instead, we must empty ourselves of power. and seek to be in solidarity with the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed of this world so that we can truly love and serve humanity. Jesus rejected tyranny in this passage. But the rise of white Christian nationalism and Christo-fascism in this country proves that most Christians in America have never learned the lesson of Matthew 20 and therefore have never truly learned how to follow Jesus. When we combine the anti-imperial force of 1 Samuel 8 with Jesus' rejection of tyranny in Matthew 20, we have a full-blown political theology of resistance that is ready-made for this fascist moment that we face right now. We don't need Hannah Arendt or Timothy Snyder to tell us why we should be opposed to tyranny, because the Bible already told us so. Jesus already told us so. Psalm 146 puts it all together. Do not put your trust in kings and princes, in mortals in whom there is no help. The Lord who sets the prisoners free and opens the eyes of the blind and lifts up the bowed down and loves those who seek justice and watches over the strangers and upholds the orphan and the widow. That's the one that you should trust in. And that's why for the last 2,000 years, people of good conscience have taken on the motto, Sic semper tyrannis. Death always to tyrants. And why Christians for the last 500 years have taken on the motto of the Scottish reformer John Knox in proclaiming, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. First, we are called to evaluate our situation, to try to name it, to try to acknowledge it, to try to reckon with exactly what we're up against, and then to answer the question, how do we resist? Donald Trump may be the president of the United States, but he is also a tyrant. Did you hear me? Donald Trump is a tyrant. And the biblical witness is clear that whenever there is a tyrant abusing their power and oppressing the people, we have a sacred duty, a holy obligation, and a divine responsibility to resist. But how do we do that? How do we do that practically? One of the finest Christian resistors of empire in history, Dr. Martin Luther King, said it best. Those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war. We must get organized. We must do this strategically and as effectively as we can. And this week I saw it. I saw at least 3, maybe 4 extraordinary examples of ordinary citizens organizing in solidarity to protect and support our immigrant neighbors. If Border Patrol thought they were going to invade our city and abduct our neighbors and harm our families and not get pushback, they were severely mistaken. Amen? On Wednesday afternoon, I was on a call hosted by Charlotte East where all the major nonprofit organizations who are serving our immigrant neighbors came together with 450 members of the community to share information and to collaborate on how to prepare for Border Patrol coming and to join forces to try and protect our neighbors and serve our neighbors. On Thursday, I was invited by one of the leaders here at Collective Liberation Church to join a WhatsApp group called Moms Walk, of over 245 moms who've come together to get organized and to get trained as ICE verifiers and to offer rides and groceries and support and mutual aid and community to our immigrant families around the Charlotte region. On Friday, I heard that the Carolina Migrant Network and Charlotte Democracy Center and the Center for the Common Good and Common Cause and Democracy North Carolina and Indivisible Charlotte and the Poor People's Campaign have all come together to form a new organization, the Charlotte Immigration Protection Alliance, to denounce federal action here in our city and to pledge their support for our immigrant community. And then on Saturday, there was a beautiful and peaceful protest against ICE, showing love for our immigrant neighbors in Uptown. But the fight is just beginning. And there's so much more for us to do. And as I've been thinking about this moment that we're in as a city, one of the people who came to my mind that I believe has so much to teach us about how to resist is a man that very few Americans know, Gene Sharp. Anybody know Gene Sharp out there? Gene is the author of over 35 books. He dedicated his life to studying the nonviolent direct action of Gandhi and A.J. Must and Henry David Thoreau and Martin Luther King Jr. to try and distill the strategies and methods and tactics that they used that were the most effective at creating change. Sharp's key belief was that power does not derive from some intrinsic quality in the powerful. Political power, regardless of the structural organization, even if it is a dictatorship, still ultimately derives from the subjects of the state. He believed that all power structures depend on our obedience in order to maintain power. And if the people decide to stop obeying, rulers lose their power. If the subjects of a system come together and recognize that they are the source of the state's power and refuse to offer the state obedience, then the leaders will be left without power. Sharp has been called the Machiavelli of nonviolence, the Clausewitz of nonviolent warfare. And his book, which we will send out because it's free and it's a PDF, From Dictatorship to Democracy, a Conceptual Framework for Liberation, has been translated into over 40 languages. And that book has directly inspired organizers and organizations all over the world to overthrow 50 different autocratic governments in the last 40 years in places like Serbia, Ukraine, Georgia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Myanmar, Indonesia, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Tunisia, Egypt, Iran, South Africa, and Sudan. The methods he provided have been effective in toppling tyrannical regimes all over the world, and now we need them. We may have never thought we would ever need Gene Sharp in America. But now we are at a time where we need to apply them to dictatorship here in America. And the key to all of his methods is for people to engage in nonviolent, direct action that is well organized and strategic. To become strategically ungovernable. That is what creates change. We are a people who have no king but Jesus. We are a people who have no king but Christ. We are a people who have no king but the King of Kings and no Lord but the Lord of Lords. We are a people who have no king but God, the God of the prophets like Samuel. And there was at least one person in Israel who did not succumb to the fear and insecurity of the people. One person in Israel who would not bend the knee to a human tyrant or the empire, and that was the prophet Samuel. And I don't know if you noticed in this story, one thing we often forget about this. Even though Samuel was deeply grieved over the people's desire for a king, God did not tell Samuel he had the right to resign. I think somebody heard me on that. Even though Samuel felt rejected, God did not tell Samuel he had the right to retire. Even though Samuel felt dismissed and even had to give in to what the people wanted, God did not tell Samuel he had the right to stop being a prophet. Amen? In fact, Samuel's role as a prophet and a prophetic power grew even more necessary now that there was a king. Because whenever there are kings, God will rise up prophets among us. And the prophet Samuel would become a continual check and critique and challenge on the new King Saul to try to help him to lead with justice and do the right thing and to challenge him when he did the wrong thing. And that's what prophets are, and that's why they're needed now more than ever. Like Samuel, we too can grieve the arrival of the authoritarian regime on our doorstep here with Border Patrol. Like Samuel, we too can feel run down and disappointed and dejected and rejected by the constant onslaught of this fascist regime, but we are not allowed to resign. We are not allowed to retire from the work of following Jesus, from speaking truth to power, from engaging in prophetic ministry, from strategically organizing, from civil disobedience, from nonviolent resistance, from remembering that we have no king but Jesus, and we have no king but the King of Kings. As that ancient Jewish saying goes, it is not up to us to finish the work, but neither are we free to neglect it. No matter how old or young we are, no matter how disappointed we are, no matter what our abilities, there is a role for us to play right now in this resistance. We have all the tools that we need, and the God of the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed and the immigrant is on our side. And if God is for us, who shall we fear? Amen.
God is still on the throne within your bosom.